A warm welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week on the program, the Israeli Prime Minister addresses the nation at the memorial ceremony of the October 7 attacks by Hamas. He's heckled by relatives of those killed in the attacks before he's able to get a word in about the retaliatory attacks on Iran. Israel hit back at Iran early Saturday, saying its military was conducting strikes against military targets. Analysts have thoughts on the nature of the strike and Iran's response. Later on in the program is my earlier recorded interview with former Permanent Secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Martha Zuhumoibi, on the situation in the Middle East. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles, and we'll be right back. The Nigerians in Diaspora Commission has helped in the rescue of 17 young Nigerian girls trafficked to Ghana. The girls have been repatriated back to Nigeria, and 5 traffickers have been arrested. It brings to 130 the number of girls repatriated back to Nigeria from Ghana alone since July 2024. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has raised over $1 billion in pledges to support displaced persons and refugees across the Sahel and Lake Chad regions. The commitment was made possible by the contributions of more than 10 donor countries, agencies and organizations dedicated to addressing the growing humanitarian needs in the crisis-hit areas. Held in collaboration with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the Donors Conference, held in Jeddah, is to provide urgent humanitarian assistance to the people of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, who were plagued with various crises and natural disasters. Finally, Egypt has proposed an initial 2-day ceasefire in Gaza to exchange 4 Israeli hostages of Hamas for some Palestinian prisoners. The proposal was made by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as efforts to defuse the devastating, more than a year-long war resumed in Qatar, with the directors of the CIA and Israel's Mossad intelligence agency taking part. President al-Sisi also said the talks should resume within 10 days of implementing the temporary ceasefire in efforts to reach a permanent one. Welcome back. Let's dive more deeply into the situation in the Middle East, and quite an active weekend it was on the part of Israel, which struck various targets in Iran, revenging the Iranian attacks on Israel on October 1st. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had only just approached the podium at the memorial ceremony to address attendees when a few men in the crowd began to heckle him. The Prime Minister looked on as the hecklers were then escorted out by security. The Prime Minister then continued his speech. He said Israel hit hard Iran's ability to defend itself and to produce missiles when its air force struck early Saturday morning. He told the attendees, "In the early morning hours of Saturday, we fulfilled our promise. The Air Force attacked throughout Iran. We hit hard Iran's defense capabilities and its ability to produce missiles that are aimed at us." He said the attack in Iran was precise and powerful and achieved all of its objectives. An American researcher said one Israeli airstrike hit a building that was part of Iran's defunct nuclear weapons development program, and he and another researcher said facilities used to mix solid fuel for missiles were also struck. The assessments based on commercial satellite imagery were reached separately by David Albright, a former UN weapons inspector, and Decker Evlith, an associate research analyst at CNA, a Washington think tank. They said Israel struck buildings in Parchin, a massive military complex near Tehran. Israel also hit Khujir, according to Evlith, a sprawling missile production site near Tehran. Videos carried by Iranian media on Saturday showed an air defense system continuously firing at apparently incoming projectiles in central Iran. The media reported multiple explosions over several hours in the capital and nearby military bases, but there were no immediate reports of damage or casualties. Before dawn, the Israeli military announced it targeted and precise strikes on military targets in Iran in response to what he called the continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against Israel had been completed and their objectives achieved.
I can now confirm that we have concluded the Israeli response to Iran's attack against Israel. We conducted targeted and precise strikes on military targets in Iran, thwarting immediate threats to the state of Israel. The Israel Defense Forces has fulfilled its mission. If the regime in Iran were to make the mistake of beginning a new round of escalation, we will be obligated to respond. Our message is clear. All those who threaten the state of Israel and seek to drag the region into wider escalation will pay a heavy price. We demonstrated today that we have both the capability and the resolve to act decisively, and we are prepared on offense and defense to defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel.
The Israeli military said scores of jets had completed 3 waves of strikes before dawn against missile factories and other sites, and warned its heavily armed arch foe not to hit back. The attack was condemned by Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates, who expressed opinions on social media. Saudi Arabia said the kingdom also affirms its unwavering position in its rejection of the continued escalation in the region and the expansion of the conflict that threatens the security and stability of the countries and people in the region. The Iraqi government spokesperson posted, "The occupying Zionist entity continues its aggressive policies and widening conflict in the region through blatant attacks that it carries out with impunity." Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan wished Iran a speedy recovery from the airstrikes.
Komşumuz İran'a ve İran hükümetine geçmiş olsun dileklerimi iletiyorum.
On Saturday, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi claimed the United States was involved in the attack. Speaking in an audio call to state media, Araghchi claimed that the U.S. had provided an air corridor and equipment to the Israeli Air Force for the attacks, which Iranian officials say caused limited damage. President Masoud Pezeshkian says his country will give an appropriate response to Israel's strikes. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said Iranian officials should determine how best to demonstrate Iran's power to Israel, and that the calculation error of the Zionist regime needs to be disrupted, as they have a calculation error regarding Iran. U.S. President Joe Biden said it appeared Israel had only struck military targets in its attack on Iran, and that he hoped they were the end.
The reason we're a little late, I was on with the show in the community for the last half hour, 3.5 hours. And it looks like they didn't hit anything other than military targets. My hope is this is the end.
In the meantime, Iranians in Tehran were indifferent to the airstrikes, many referring to the attack as small. Meanwhile, the Israeli offensive in Gaza and in Lebanon continues against Hamas and Hezbollah, with fresh strikes recorded over the weekend.
There were more Israeli strikes on Lebanon on Sunday. Strikes reduced buildings in the southern suburbs of Beirut to rubble on Sunday. A Hezbollah flag could be seen placed amongst the rubble of a building and the wreckage of a car following in the aftermath of the strikes. There was another Israeli strike on a residential building in the Bekaa Valley, south of Lebanon, on Sunday. People have been carrying their belongings as they walk towards the border from Lebanon to Syria. At Al-Masna, where the main Masna border separates the neighboring countries, people were seen walking mostly on foot as the road is damaged. A shepherd was seen herding his goats towards the Syrian side of the border. An Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced Palestinian families in Shati camp in Gaza City killed 9 people and wounded 20 others, with many in critical condition. The Israeli military said it was looking into the report on the strike on the school. Hamas media says 3 local journalists were among those killed at the school in Shati Said Radwan. Head of digital media at Hamas Al-Aqsa Television, Hanin Baroud, and Hamza Abu Selmeya. The Hamas-run Gaza government media office described their deaths as an assassination. It says the number of Palestinian journalists killed by Israeli fire since October 7, 2023 has risen to 180. But there have also been strikes from Lebanon. At least 2 buildings were directly hit by rockets launched from Lebanon on Sunday, wounding at least 5 people and causing heavy damages in some sites. In the Israeli Arab town of Tamra, a rocket launched from Lebanon made a direct hit on a house, severely wounding 1 person and moderately wounding 2 others. In an industrial area near Acre, a UAV hit a factory. Other than damages to the building, 2 of the factory's employees were wounded and evacuated to hospital. The Israeli military says at least 90 projectiles were identified crossing from Lebanon into Israeli territory. Meanwhile, dozens of people were injured on Sunday when a truck struck a bus stop at a major intersection in central Israel. Police officers, soldiers, and ambulance service were seen surrounding the bus at the scene of the incident. There was 1 death reported eventually, and about 40 people were injured to varying degrees, including some seriously, and were taken to nearby hospitals. Israel's Minister of National Security and far-right leader, Itamar Ben-Gvir, told reporters the incident is being investigated.
During the week, I had a conversation with former Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Martin Zuhumoibi, on Israel's war in the Middle East. Now, at the time of the conversation, there were still reactions to the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Joining me now is former Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Martin Zuhumoibi. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much, Amarachi. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and this will be our first interview. Interestingly, we're taking on a very serious topic, which is Yahya Sinwar's death and its impact on Hamas and the war in Gaza. Would you consider the man a hero like the rest of the Arab world?
in the scheme of things, going by the kind of life that Yahya has led, how many years in prison in Israel until his release in 2011, and now his death just on the 16th of October, a few days ago, I think the Arabs will celebrate him as a hero, and they are right to do so, given that he has died for the cause he strongly believes in, which is pro-Arab and pro-Palestinian. So in that sense, historians of that pedigree would describe him as a hero. But perspectives are perspectives, and they are determined by who is doing the viewing and who is doing the analysis. I'm sure there will be people who hold a contrary view, but for a historian who has followed closely the life that Yahya Sinwar has led, I think he deserves to be celebrated by Arabs and as a hero.
He is the mastermind of the right. He's the mastermind of the October 7 attacks, and the Israeli government has released a video of him and his family as they were walking into a tunnel in Gaza in preparation for the attacks on October 7, and then the way he died in someone else's home. He was found by a drone and all of that. Some people, you know, the Palestinians and those who sympathize with their cause, think that he was fighting on behalf of the people of Palestine. Would you say that Hamas's agenda in the Middle East has been justified? And would you consider Sinwar a martyr to this agenda of Hamas and the Palestinians?
You're asking for my perspective as a scholar, as a Nigerian, and not as an Arab or as an Israeli. Incidentally, my position is very much colored by the role that I have played in history. I was the first African to be elected president of the United Nations Human Rights Council. As nation states, as citizens of different countries in the world, we came together in 1945 and created the United Nations. Of course, we were colonies then. All of Africa were colonies of some big countries who were the main formulators and creators of the United Nations. But as members of the global community today, we all subscribe to certain international rules and standards for governing the complex relations that go on between nations that make up the global community. Coming from that perspective, I would think that what is going on in the Middle East at this time has to be viewed from the perspective of international conduct and international laws accepted by the Committee of Nations. And if we take that perspective, definitely what is going on at the moment is totally unacceptable. We cannot have wars that will not end. No one today can really predict how the present conflict in that place would end. And different perspectives are being given. Some are seeing it as a quest to have a greater Israel. Some are seeing it as sovereign countries like Lebanon wanting just being threatened now that its independence will be mutilated and destroyed. And that cannot be in conformity with international law. Never seen in any conflict that we have seen since the post-Second World War world, where the United Nations have been treated with so much disrespect and been demonstrated as irrelevant to the resolving of disputes and conflicts. That a UN Secretary General will be denied entry by a country has never happened. And that's what we are seeing now in Israel. So with Israel and the global community and the Palestinians. So I think there has to be lines drawn so that we can have some sanity in the place. And that cannot go on endlessly. And we expect the world to be the same. No. So I seriously think that international rules and norms have to be respected.
People have criticized the UN for being unable to hold off Israel in its quest to extinguish Hamas, to also get rid of Hezbollah, and eventually to attack the one who's sponsoring both groups, which is Iran. They say the UN has been powerless in the face of Israel's so-called atrocities in the Middle East, but they also haven't really condemned the opposing side, that's the Hamas and Hezbollah, and their activities on Israel.
What is the United Nations? The United Nations is a global institution made up of sovereign countries. You know that 51 countries met in San Francisco in 1945 to create the United Nations or concoct the United Nations. Three-quarters of the members, the present-day members of the United Nations, 193 countries, three-quarters of them were colonies, were not part of the San Francisco Charter in 1945. So they were not there. In Africa today, we have 55 member countries that are members of the United Nations. But are they really relevant? None of them is a permanent member of the Security Council. So the United Nations remains what it was and what it has always been for the past 79 years. And until the reform, a necessary reform is carried out there, that demonstrates geographical and equitable representation of all races and countries of the world, including the 55, at least one African country should be there. But so long as you have big powers who are there, who were the allies, who were the victors of the so-called allied power, the allied victors, who are now permanent members of the Security Council, who dictate whatever happens in the United Nations, you cannot have the UN give out equity and justice to the global community. And that is the puzzle in the United Nations. And that's why the UN is what it is. But we have never had a situation in the history of the UN where the Secretary General is declared a persona non grata by any member of the United Nations. None, it has never happened. But it has happened, and they are getting away with it, with the backing and support of the so-called, some of the so-called permanent members of the Security Council.
Do you think
of which the country is deserved to be represented in that body?
I'm sorry for
interrupting.
So
the so-called democracy support for the United Nations doesn't exist really in reality.
Right. I'm so
you can't have justice.
So sorry for interrupting you. But do you think a two-state solution is still feasible? Will that be the solution to ending this crisis in the Middle East?
A two-state solution will solve the problem. The implications of that is that Israel recognizes Palestine and Palestine recognizes Israel, and the global community buys into it. That will solve the problem. But some of the so-called permanent members of the Security Council are not party to the two-state solution provisions that we've been marketing for many, many years, and which a majority of UN General Assembly subscribes to, but one or two permanent members do not agree. And so it becomes a nullity in an organization where one country alone can determine the resolution of 190, how many countries. Is that democracy? I don't understand it.
So will Yahya Sinwar's death perhaps result in, the negotiations for a ceasefire and peace in the Middle East? Would it fast track that? I know there's another leader of Hamas who's in hiding. They said they will not be revealing who that is. But do you think that he would be on board for negotiations?
Look, I think it's a matter of political will. The assassination of Sinwar and of Nasrallah and of Hania and all of those Al-Harari, I don't think that will solve the problem, because if they are assassinated, the people regard them as martyrs. And because they think they have a basis for that sort of position. So definitely that if the solution is not there. So I remember the Gashan Baskiri, the man who led the negotiation that resulted in the release of Sinwar in 2011, he is quoted to have said that it is a moment of either opportunity or a moment of doom, the killing of this man, Sinwar. So what do we want? We want to seize the opportunity and take this as an opportunity to pursue a ceasefire and end this massacre that is the genocide that seems to be going on in Palestine. I think we should. I think the global community should. There can be no victory. You see, it's mad people who go to wars, and when they finish discountenancing diplomats and diplomacy, they come down together and beg for peace. So it is better for diplomacy to prevail and to take precedence. And let us put diplomacy and peace first. When we have peace, then we have justice and equity. But we cannot go on endless wars. I think that would be a solution to the problem. It will never be. It has never been.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your analysis on the issue. Ambassador Martins Humoibi, thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you, Amarachi. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
That's the program this week. Remember, our social media handles and the comment section of this video are always open for your thoughts and comments. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.